Hi, this is Matt from Work in Fintech, and today we're really excited to be joined with Robby Young, who's CEO of Animoca Brands. And today he's going to be interviewed with myself, most importantly with Benyamin Ahmed, the Chief Evangelist of Work in Fintech and creator of the Weird Whales collection. Hi, Ben. Hi, Robby.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
Hi. Awesome. So I guess, Robby, just to kick off, can you talk through your journey from back in the day when you were studying at college, all the way through to your role today? And like we were just saying, it probably wasn't a straight line that to take you where you are, but it'd be interesting to hear how that journey was for you.
Sure. So, how long do we have? I'm older than you think. Let's see. Let's start with the stuff up front. I studied political science and public policy in school, so I didn't end up doing anything career-wise that related to what I studied, but I think I studied things that were quite diverse and a lot of different things that I think helped teach me how to think, because part of what I studied included econ and statistics and, all kinds of, some classics and history and lots of different things that just, I think, helps give you a bit of a good, well-rounded education, if you will. So I have definitely applied some of that, especially the literature. I started out working primarily in what the bankers call TMT, so telecom, media, and technology. I began in the early days of wireless telecoms when it was still analog before digital. And these were the early days of mobile, so mobile telephony, what we now have as smartphones. And then I moved into the internet because the internet, the World Wide Web, was just starting at the time, and there was a lot of excitement around the potential of the internet. And so I tried to figure out a way to jump in. And I was fortunate enough to be able to convince my family to lend me a little bit of money to start a business. And we started a web development business making websites for companies. And this was this was about 25 years ago, in 1997. And so we did that for several years, quite successfully. And as people will tell you, when the market is rising and people are feverish and enthusiastic about everything, then making money is not hard. And so I mistook success at that time for skill, and learned that lesson a few years into it when the market crashed and people didn't want websites so much anymore at least for a bit. So then I started another business together with a couple of friends of mine, one of whom was somebody that I had gone to secondary school with, and another one I had met, just working. And we started a media business, and this was, this was all in Asia, so I lived in Asia at the time. And so we started a media business to roll up advertising-supported media in China, so TV, radio, outdoor. And so we raised venture capital, and we acquired media companies into a holding company with the intent to take the whole thing public. And it didn't quite work out that way, but we did okay. So the magazine business, we ended up merging with another public magazine company and spinning it off, it was actually a newspaper company, and spinning off the magazine business and listing that. And then we took the remaining part of the business and planned to do an IPO with it. And so we got our IPO organized and prepared our roadshow, and we submitted our documents to the SEC in the US to do a US IPO, and that was in September of 2008. So for those of you who remember that time, it was arguably the worst possible time to have picked to do that, because the entire global financial system collapsed within a couple of weeks of us submitting our prospectus. So we had to postpone that IPO. And again, deal with the unexpected. So we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and try again. So we tried to do an IPO again a year later, but the financial markets were in no condition to support a riskier company like ours, because it was still a young business. And then eventually we ended up taking the business public about, what would this be, 2009, 3 years later. And at that time, I stayed on with the business for a year and helped to do some handover and stuff. And then I joined Animoca Brands, where I am now. And this was, a business that I thought was really interesting because it is, we were a mobile game company at that time. This was before blockchain. But mobile games seemed to me to be a bit of everything that I'd ever done before. So it was a bit of telecoms, it was a bit of media, it was a bit of internet, it was a bit of advertising, all in one product. And so that intrigued me. Even though, I didn't know anything about making games. I'd played games as a kid. I grew up playing games like many kids. And in fact, I'm just the right age that I grew up literally at the invention of video games. So I started with Pong, and so that was, a formative part of my youth. And that didn't make me any better at knowing how to make games, but it intrigued me to be involved in the industry. And it's been a fabulous business to be a part of. 5 years into it, we ended up pivoting to focus on blockchain, and decided that was going to be an avenue of growth potentially for us, and that this new technology was going to change the way we make games and change the way that people play games and their relationship to games, particularly, financially as well as from an experiential point of view. And so we've been working on that for the last 5 years, and hopefully people still enjoy our games. Sorry, that was a long intro.
That was great. The September 2008 IPO must have been quite a sore point. But interesting, obviously, the Bitcoin white paper came out in October 2008, and there's no, it's no surprise really that it came out so swiftly after that. You said 5 years ago when you pivoted into blockchain with Animoca. What was the thinking behind that at the time?
Like most things that make people look smart in hindsight, it was luck. So we had a relationship with a startup company in Vancouver, and we were in the process of acquiring them, and we were looking for new avenues of growth all the time. The mobile games market was maturing, and growth was slowing industry wide, and so we were always looking for different, whether it's different content categories or different gameplay styles. And in looking for new avenues of growth, we were acquiring a business in Vancouver that made back-end software for multiplayer games. It could make your single-player game into a multiplayer game. And they had let some people go, and they had extra office space. And so they sublet their office space to some people who were doing a hackathon project. And actually, it was a bunch of crypto people. And so it was through that relationship that we got to know those people and ended up offering to help them to publish their first game. And that game was CryptoKitties. And that was the first, arguably, blockchain game. And that was what's now called Dapper Labs. And they had basically invented the NFT about a month before we met them. For the purpose of making CryptoKitties. So we ended up publishing CryptoKitties in Greater China. And that was really the experience for us that, very quickly, because personally I didn't really know much of anything about blockchain up until that point. Many of my colleagues had been following Bitcoin and Ethereum for a while before that, but more out of curiosity than anything that had to do with our business. And I think at that point, we started to understand very quickly that this could have a huge impact on the game industry, because although CryptoKitties was not a game of the type that we were familiar with making, because it's a collectibles experience primarily, what it taught us about the idea of having fungible and non-fungible tokens was something that seemed really obvious to us that this was how games in the future should always be made. Because basically, when you think about tokenizing a game, what you're doing is you're telling people to buy a fungible token like Ethereum or what have you inside the game, so a virtual currency, to buy virtual items as NFTs. And that's what people playing games have already been doing for 15 years. That's free-to-play gaming. So you don't have to teach them how to do anything new to bring blockchain into their lives. But what it does do is it gives them true digital ownership over their stuff, the stuff in the games that they don't currently own, that they only rent. And so we thought, well, this just makes sense. I mean, if you have the choice of having a game where you pay virtual currency for virtual stuff and you own it versus one where you do the same thing but you don't own it, why would you pick the latter? I mean, it just seemed obvious. It was like a light bulb moment. So we decided from that point on that we were going to stop making so-called traditional games and just make blockchain games.
Robby, you've just touched on this a little, talking about blockchain games. Let's go to the basics. How would you describe a blockchain game to someone new and how it upgrades the existing model?
Sure. So I think, first of all, talking about blockchain games is kind of a funny thing because it's not any specific kind of a game. I think, we use the term blockchain games now only because most games don't use blockchain and only a small subset do. Just the same way that a decade ago we might have talked about online games because most games were not online games. But I think it's one of those things that over time we're going to stop talking about blockchain because it will just be part of the infrastructure of games. But I think what differentiates a blockchain game is that, as I was mentioning, the in-game currency, the soft currency in the game, and also the assets in the game that you buy, the race cars, the swords, whatever those items are in the game, are tokenized as NFTs. And so what that means is that you can own those items. And the ownership of those items is really important because we haven't really had true digital ownership before, which means that you have agency as the customer, the owner, over those items. You can buy them, you can sell them, you can trade them, you can gift them to your friend, you can take them out of the game experience to a third-party marketplace or to another game. And that's really, where the excitement happens, because historically games have always been siloed, experiences, and they never mix with each other. The point is to keep all your users in this walled garden and extract as much revenue from those users as you can. But in the Web3 context, a blockchain game allows you to create a game that is one part of a bigger puzzle, which is, now we're calling the metaverse, which is lots of different game experiences where that stuff that you pay for in the game can be brought to other places. And so I think the definition of a blockchain game is this tokenization and this interoperability that gives you the ability to really own stuff in games that's yours, that you can treat like your physical stuff. I can play with it here, I can play with it there. And we should have been expecting this from games a long time ago.
So do you kind of see this gaming element being the on-ramp for the world to move into blockchain? Because at the moment, blockchain gaming users are pretty small compared to vanilla kind of gaming users compared to the world and so on. But do you see gaming then as an on-ramp to blockchain and also as an on-ramp into the metaverse? And like you said, the interoperability piece when you're jumping, because before you couldn't jump from Call of Duty to World of Warcraft. Now there's a way you could, essentially.
Yes. And I think most importantly, we have to generalize and say that entertainment is the route by which most technology is brought to a mass market audience. So everything from the smartphone to the video cassette recorder to you name it, these are all things that happened, inventions, online payments. Online payments came around not because of e-commerce, but because people wanted to buy entertainment online, right? I won't talk about what kind of entertainment in front of Ben, but people wanted entertainment. And so they figured out how to use credit cards and buy things online, because I think that entertainment is what drives people to want to buy new stuff. It's exciting, it's fun, they enjoy it. It's not, frankly, financial services. People don't want to, buy a new device so that they can do online banking in a better way because it's not fun. It's a utility. So within entertainment nowadays, gaming is by far the biggest entertainment medium. It's bigger than TV, it's bigger than film and music, etc. So gaming is the best entertainment route to reach the biggest possible audience. So it's a long answer, Matthew, to your question, which is that I think gaming is the way that we're going to onboard the majority of people in the world into blockchain.
And Robby, how would you define the metaverse? How would you say how Web3 and NFTs all intersect together to form this metaverse?
So to me, the metaverse as a concept is inextricably linked to the idea of Web3, because I think that what we have in Web3 is, thanks to blockchain provides this secure transactional layer on top of the internet that we didn't have in Web 2. And with this ability to exchange value between each other, that I can send you a token and you can receive it and we can exchange that value over the internet, I think that is fundamental to the metaverse, because the metaverse to me is actually not all that different than what we already have today. We've got great experiences. We have Minecraft and Fortnite and Roblox and, social network sites. We have all these great, again, siloed experiences. And the metaverse is really just our ability to bring all of those together so that they talk to each other. And if you bring all of those things together, then I think it's very important that you have to have the portability and interoperability of stuff. So if I own something in Fortnite, why can't I bring it to Roblox? Why can't I bring it to Minecraft? Why can't I bring it to Facebook? That interoperability is really key. And once we use blockchain and we tokenize these things, then we can not only facilitate that interoperability, but because it's the metaverse, it's this digital space. The important thing about this space also is that people are able to own it. Not just people. Businesses, companies, entertainers, etc. Everybody can have their piece of the virtual world just the way they have their piece of the physical world. And they can use that, as a business or as personal space, etc. And that's what I think the metaverse is. So I think, it's not necessarily this sort of Ready Player One virtual reality. I mean, I think that's part of a metaverse experience. But I think it's more like just the coming together and interoperability of all experiences generally. And I think that's going to happen slowly over time, the more that we adopt blockchain.
Moving over to what you're doing with Animoca Brands on the investment front, you've made some 340 investments in lots of different companies, and presumably, like you said, on the blockchain side, CryptoKitties was one of the first projects. How do you look at different projects and companies, and what's kind of driving that strategy?
So we look at a lot of projects. We have a great team, of people around the world, and we work with also a lot of other great investors in the space, because we're always happy to share projects and ideas and stuff. So I think we've got a great network of people who understand our interest in Web3 and also how we can hopefully be helpful to people in the ecosystem and find ways to work together. So we generally, we have a very broad-based approach. I think we think of Web3 culture as our sweet spot, but that can embrace many different things. Gaming obviously is probably the largest part of it, because those are our roots. But it also includes things like art and music and fashion, as well as DeFi, because all of these are aspects of Web3 culture. And the beauty of Web3 is, again, going back to that interoperability drum that I will keep beating throughout this discussion. All of those different aspects of Web3 culture have the potential for interoperability. And so that's why we're active, at least to a certain extent, in all of them, because you have the ability to have a metaverse type experience that includes fashion and music and DeFi, etc. And, our most well-known project, the Sandbox, for example, includes all of those under one roof.
Robby, where do you see the internet in 10 years? Do you think within 10 years we'll have true mass adoption with Web3 and NFTs?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think it's going to take that long. I'd say 5. This is one of those where you're going to look back at this video and then laugh at me later, but we'll see.
And also, what other Web3 products are you interested in?
What other Web3 products? Honestly, my own personal interest overlaps a lot with our interest as a company. I mean, we like to support projects that adhere to openness and adhere to a multi-chain ecosystem. I think the most exciting thing about Web3 is that it's essentially an open source movement. I think the thing that amazes me is the innovation that we see from people who are, building on top of other people's assets and achievements. Just like your weird whales, right? I think the coolest thing about the weird whales is not necessarily that you made it, no offense, but that somebody else can make something really cool with them. That's the best part. That's the innovation. That's what we get in Web3, this collaboration where we have a way to all work together and layer our achievements on, stand on each other's shoulders, so to speak. But at the same time, we have digital rights management and IP protection built into the system so that everybody benefits. So that if I use your weird whales to make something really cool, you will still benefit from that because it's IP that you created and you as the creator deserve, to be recognized for that. And that's really important. And we've never had the way before in the internet to be able to really honor that, that creativity. And that's why we end up with streaming platforms, which I think is unfortunate. I mean, they're amazing from a user experience standpoint, but they're not terribly great for creators.
So in your unique position with you've been in various industries over the last 25 odd years. You've spent a lot of time in blockchain and obviously been deep in it now. You've got a very unique kind of view because you're involved in so many different projects through the investment side of the business as well. So you're seeing all these things going on. If you were talking to someone who's looking at Web3 and the metaverse and these kind of sectors that we're looking at and this next evolution of the internet, where do you see the biggest opportunities for someone who's looking to get involved from a career perspective or even if they're looking to build a startup? Yeah, and where do you see kind of things converging a few years down the line as well? You've already said in 5 years' time you'll kind of see that mass adoption. At some point we will see the Ready Player One, goggles, contact lenses, whatever. Yeah. But where do you see the opportunities kind of right now for people, and does that kind of blossoms as it goes forward?
Sure. I guess I see it in two main places. Fintech is one, obviously, because fintech is the oldest part of the blockchain-related world, and it's not mature, but it's maturing. And I think there are plenty of different ways for people who are finance industry professionals to be involved in blockchain and digital assets. And I think that it's at a stage now where I don't think, I would recommend to anybody who's in finance that they should consider, a career in digital assets, because I think that even from a conservative standpoint, you can build a solid career in digital assets. Whereas I think, a few years ago, I would have said, well, if you can afford to take the risk, and put aside a few years, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I think digital assets are here to stay now. So that's, if you're going to take a conservative view on the blockchain world, that's the best place. I think if you can afford to be a little bit more risky, then I would say definitely come to our neck of the woods, which is culture and entertainment. And within that, gaming is going to be the lowest hanging fruit. I think eventually blockchain will make its mark in a big way in industries like music, for example. But that will take more time, and these are still very early days in an industry like that. I think the best place to get started is honestly just to get involved in it yourself. So buy some NFTs, get involved in some projects, jump onto Discord and Twitter and engage yourself in some communities and see if it's for you. Because I think one of the things about working in entertainment is that it is it's a little bit of a passion-based career, meaning that people do it because they get to work also with content and in an industry that often overlaps with personal interest. And so I think getting into the culture is a part of being successful, because I think if you're not involved in the culture, it's more difficult, because this is not the kind of industry where you just come and sit at a desk for 8 hours a day for a steady paycheck.
I think that leads quite nicely into my next question around what's a good skill set and mindset for young hungry students that are looking to get into the industry. Like you already said, it's not a desk job 9 to 5. It's a culture element, and it's like you say, it's very open. But yeah, what kind of skill set and mindset would you think people should strive towards?
Interestingly, I would probably be giving more advice to people who are older, because I think young people already have generally the right mindset for this, because they haven't gotten too stuck in their ways and their mentality and their way of thinking, so that they're open to the fact that things can be done in a different way, because they're young. Things have only been done for a certain amount of time as far as they're concerned, and I think that's one of the things about Web3, which is you need to be able to see where it's going, to be able to appreciate what it's capable of, because what it can do today is less than perfect. It's a little bit like having an electric car. An electric car is a great thing, but it's a pain in the ass to charge, and it doesn't necessarily last that long. It has a kind of a fundamental flaw, which doesn't mean you shouldn't buy an electric car. It's just something that always nags you in the background about electric cars, because we're halfway there, sort of on the road to mass adoption. But if you can get your mind around the fact that, well, it doesn't matter that it's difficult to charge, just put all that aside and forget about it, because I can imagine a world where electric cars are easy to charge and you can charge them in 5 minutes, then you start to think of it completely differently, and you start to define how you are towards that industry or that object in a way that visualizes it the way that it should be, and then you can help build it and make it that way. And I think Web3 is kind of the same. So if you play a blockchain game today, it's a different experience. It's not as good an experience as playing a Web2 game. It's just not. It can't be, because by definition, something that is open and interoperable with the rest of the world, the UI, UX, that experience can never be as good as something that's maniacally controlled by only one company. Just like, if you compare the experience on Android to iOS, it's different, because in one case, everything is massively controlled. But there are benefits to openness. And so you have to see what those benefits are, and they can outweigh, the amazing UI, UX of total control.
Robby, this question can relate to Web3 or outside of your personal life. What new skills are you learning right now?
What new skills am I learning? I think, first of all, I've not thought so much about macroeconomics before in my life. Since I studied economics to begin with in school, I don't think I've thought about macroeconomics as much as I have in the last 2 years. And, I think Web3 has really taught me to think about, it's like going back to, the interesting thing about Web3 is I think it levels the playing field, because when I joined the game industry a decade ago, I was new to the industry and I didn't know much, or I didn't know anything about making games. And so it was daunting. And, I would go to conferences and I would try to learn as much as I could, but I knew, I always felt like this stupidest person in the room because I didn't know anything. I was brand new. If you asked me about selling advertising on TV, I could tell you about that, but I didn't know anything about games. And so, 5 years into it, I knew more about making games, at least from a certain perspective. But now in the world of blockchain games, we're all new to it. And we're all learning as we go. And I think that for me, the most rewarding part of it is that ability to learn together with everybody else, on the one hand. And number two, I think that the ethos and the philosophy and the spirit of Web3, I think, is the best part of it to me. And this is something that I think I hope resonates with younger people too, like, as you mentioned, Matthew, students today, because, I've spent most of my career working in China. And in China, the way that people work culturally, it's a very, very competitive environment. There's a lot of people. And what happens is that people are very secretive because they're very competitive. And so as a result, if you tell other people what you're doing, often they will take your ideas because they figure that if you've said it, it's fair game. And so everybody's very secretive. You'll go out to a cocktail party and you'll talk to people, and nobody will actually talk about what they're actually doing because it's it's a competitive threat. And it's hard to live that way. And now I find myself in the completely opposite side of the spectrum, which is in the Web3 world, because collaboration is built into the system. We all have a way that we can work together through interoperability. It makes everybody your potential partner as opposed to your competitor. And I have to say that from a career standpoint, I've never had so much enjoyment in my career, except now, when I'm in a position that everybody I meet, it's not about, oh, what can I learn from them? And I can try to then outcompete them by learning something from them. It's, hey, what can we do together? Because whatever it is, let's partner, let's do something together. And I'm happy to be an open book about what we do because it doesn't matter. We all have ways to work together because we're not all fighting for one thing, and it's not winner take all.
So playing on that point of you're having the most fun in your career right now,
mm-hmm.
If you were to go back in time to speak to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
Okay, couple of pieces of advice. Try really hard to remember until you're about 35 that you don't know as much as you think you do, even though you might think you do, because you'll figure out later that you didn't know as much as you thought you did. And I think there are some certain fundamentals. So I think one of the things that I missed out on personally is I didn't really spend much time in my career early on working for other people. I started my own business when I was 26, which, I thought in hindsight, maybe even was a little bit young. Maybe I should have spent a few more years working for other people, because I think sometimes that more conservative path of working for a big company, having a boss or two or three, it's also part of your education. It's not just a job. And so you can learn valuable skills, you can learn ways to interact with other people. And so there's definitely some of that. So I think for me, and this also could be a grass is greener kind of thing. Who knows? I might not have benefited from it, but I always feel like maybe I might have been able to do things differently, but and for the better if I'd had a little bit more experience, because I spent many years trying to find my own way. And maybe I could have shortcut some of that if I'd had more mentorship at a younger age. The second thing I would say is for anybody starting a business, don't start it by yourself. Start it with partners. Find friends, find other professionals, collaborators, but don't do it yourself. My first business I started myself, and that was a mistake. And it was a mistake because most startups don't turn out well. And that's just math. So, as hard as you work and as ambitious as you are, and no matter how good your ideas, the odds are against you. So there will be failures along the way, and I've had plenty of failures. Most of the businesses I started didn't turn out well, right? And what you can learn from that, I think, my suggestion was to start it with partners, because the businesses that I have been involved with partners, when things are tough, there are other people to share the burden who also have that burden of responsibility. They're also big shareholders and founders of the business. And let me tell you, just as it's nice to be able to share good times when things are going well with your partners, but it's even better to share the lows and the burdens with some other people and have more smart minds around the table to help figure out the problems, because, that old adage of the buck stops here, if it stops only at your desk and nobody else's, those are big shoes to fill.
That's some great advice there, Robby. So I guess just to wrap up then, going all the way back to when your 18-year-old self and your studies and so on, you said there was quite a diverse learning that you had, and you actually went down a route where it taught you how to think, which became really useful, made you very well-rounded. The piece you just touched on then about mentorship, that's one of the things that we're trying to help with working Fintech, is trying to provide mentors for people in exactly that situation. And going on to the metaverse, you did say you do see entertainment as an on-ramp into the metaverse and Web3, and the metaverse actually bringing together all these siloed worlds and environments with interoperability, portability, openness, and then built on the Web3 tenets of collaboration around innovation, and that actually levels the playing field. And lastly, the opportunities you spoke about, fintech with blockchain and digital assets and so on is an area people should be looking at. And if they want to take a little bit more risk, have a look into culture and entertainment, with gaming being that low-hanging fruit. So if people are getting excited about this stuff that you said, or a few light bulbs may have been switched on, what's a good place to kind of follow yourself and Animoca and the things and the projects that you're working on and looking at?
Sure. Well, obviously, our website is a destination for everything, but I would say if you're interested in Web3 particularly, go to Twitter, because, Web3 is actually the biggest, crypto Twitter is the biggest part of Twitter. And I know that from being told by people at Twitter that it's the most active content category on Twitter. And it's also, the town square of the blockchain community. So I'd say follow us on Twitter and get involved with the community. Follow Ben, follow you, follow everybody who's in Web3, and you'll get to know things very, very quickly.
Fantastic. Robby Young, CEO of Animoca Brands, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thank you, Robby.